Listen here, child. Come close to this fire where the ancestors speak through flame and smoke. I'm gonna tell you about a woman whose name still echoes through the bayous of Louisiana like a conjure song that won't never die. They called her Abigail in the white man's tongue, but her true name, her African name, was Adwoa, born on a Monday when the spirits were restless. This ain't no fairy tale, no sir. This here's blood truth, the kind that stains the earth red and don't wash away with all the rain in heaven. In them days of deep sorrow when the Middle Passage was drinking souls like water, her story began on the coast of Africa, where the ocean met suffering. And Lord have mercy on what I'm about to tell you now. The year was 1828, and the village of Adwoa's people sat nestled in the green belly of the Gold Coast, where palm trees whispered secrets to the wind, and the drums spoke the language of the ancestors every evening when the sun bled into the horizon. She was just a girl child then, maybe 12 or 13 summers old, with eyes that held the knowing of the old ones, and skin dark as the richest earth where yams grew fat and plentiful. Her mama, a woman strong-backed and fierce, taught her the ways of roots and herbs, how to call on the orishas when trouble came knocking, how to read the signs in bird flight and river current. Now folks swear on their lives they seen the smoke before they heard the screams. That morning started like any other. Women pounding cassava, children chasing chickens through the compound, old men sitting under the baobab tree sharing wisdom older than time itself. But the ancestors, they was trying to warn us. A vulture circled 3 times over the village at dawn. Mama saw it, crossed herself in the old way and whispered, "Something wicked this way comes." Lord of glory, she was right. They came at midday when the sun was burning high and merciless. Portuguese slavers with faces like death itself, their pale skin ghostly under wide-brimmed hats, rifles gleaming like Satan's own promise. African traders rode with them, men who'd sold their souls for iron beads and rum, their eyes empty as dried wells. The sound, sweet Jesus, the sound, was pure confusion, a ruckus of gunfire and screaming that tore through that peaceful village like a whip through flesh. Adwoa saw her daddy fall first, a proud man of iron who fought with nothing but a farming hoe against them guns. The bullet took him in the chest, and he dropped like a dry leaf, blood steaming on the red clay path. Her mama grabbed her arm with a grip strong enough to bruise bone and hissed, "Run, child! Run to the forest!" But where could they run when hell itself had opened up in their own home? The quarters. No, not quarters yet. This was still home, still sacred ground, burned with a fury that made the sky black. Flames licked at the thatched roofs like the devil's own tongue, and the smoke carried the smell of everything familiar, turning to ash and memory. Women clutched babies to their chests while men fought with bare hands against iron chains. The elders, them old wise ones who carried the stories of 10 generations, were cut down without mercy, their blood watering the same earth they'd blessed for decades. Adwoa ran, her legs pumping like pistons, but a hand, calloused and cruel, snatched the back of her wrapper cloth and yanked her down hard. She hit the ground with her face in the dirt, tasting blood and terror. When she looked up, she saw one of the traders, a man with a scar running from his eye to his jaw like a mark of Cain, grinning down at her with teeth filed sharp. "This one's young and strong," he said in their own tongue, words that cut deeper than any blade. "She'll fetch a good price across the water." They bound her wrists with rope that bit into her skin like fire ants, tied her neck to a coffle with 20 other souls, mostly women and children, all of them scared to death and crying out to gods who seemed too far away to hear. Adwoa twisted her head back one last time to see her village, the only world she'd ever known, dissolving into smoke and screams. Her mama's voice rose above it all, a wail so full of grief it could have cracked the sky. "Adwoa, my baby, my Monday child." But there was no going back. The slavers drove him forward with whips and curses through the forest where the spirits watched silent and heavy-hearted, down to the coast where the great waters stretched endless and terrible. Folks say the ocean swallowed more tears that day than it had in 100 years. When they reached the shore, Adwoa saw it for the first time, the slave ship, a wooden beast sitting fat and evil in the harbor, its sails folded like the wings of some demon bird. The white men called it the Esperanza, which in their Portuguese tongue meant hope. Sweet Jesus, what a damned lie that was. That ship was the coffin of hope, the killer of dreams, the thief of souls. They was stripped naked right there on the beach, men in white coats poking and prodding at 'em like they was livestock at market. Adwoa felt shame burn hotter than the sun on her bare skin, but she kept her eyes fixed on the horizon, refusing to let 'em see her break. An old woman in the coffle, her body bent from years of labor, leaned close and whispered, "Keep your spirit, child. They can chain the body, but the soul flies free if you strong enough." The branding came next. Lord have mercy, the branding. They heated the iron till it glowed red as hellfire, then pressed it to Adwoa's shoulder with a sizzle and a stench that made her stomach heave. The letter E burned into her flesh, marking her as property of the Esperanza's captain. She bit down on her own tongue to keep from screaming, tasting copper and rage. And in that moment, something inside her hardened like clay in a kiln. She made herself a promise right then and there. I'm gonna survive this. I'm gonna live to see that white man pay. They was herded onto the ship like cattle, driven into the hold through a hatch barely wide enough for a body to squeeze through. The stench hit first. Unwashed bodies, human waste, vomit, death. A smell so powerful it was a physical thing, thick enough to choke on. The darkness swallowed him whole. Adwoa couldn't see nothing but shapes and shadows, couldn't hear nothing but moaning and the clanking of chains. They shackled her to the wooden floor, wrist to wrist with another woman, ankle to ankle with a man she couldn't even see in that suffocating blackness. The space was so low they couldn't sit up straight, couldn't stand, couldn't do nothing but lie there in their own filth while the ship rocked and groaned like a living thing hungry for suffering. Days passed, or was it weeks? Time lost all meaning in that floating tomb. They fed 'em slop once a day, forced 'em to swallow it or get beat. The sick ones, and there was plenty, moaned and cried out in languages from all across Africa, a symphony of agony that wove together Yoruba, Igbo, Fante, Mandinka. Some prayed to Jesus, some to Allah, some to the Orishas, and some to gods whose names had no Christian equivalent. Adwoa found herself whispering to Yamoja, the mother of waters, begging her to either deliver them or take them quick and merciful. But Yamoja, if she was listening, stayed silent. One night, or maybe it was day, who could tell in that perpetual darkness, the ship finally lurched into motion. The anchor chains rattled, the sails caught wind, and the Esperanza began its cursed journey across the Atlantic. Adwoa felt the movement in her stomach, felt the way the wooden hull creaked and moaned, as if the ship itself was reluctant to carry such wicked cargo. She pressed her forehead against the damp wood and whispered a vow in her native tongue, words she'd heard her mama say when making sacred promises. I will survive. I will remember. I will live to tell this story. So help me, spirits of my ancestors. And just as them words left her lips, a voice spoke from the darkness beside her, clear and strong despite the chaos. Adwoa. Her birth name. Her true name. Spoken in perfect Fante with an accent that sounded like home. She turned her head, heart hammering in her chest, and in the dim shaft of light coming through the deck boards above, she caught a glimpse of eyes, ancient eyes in a young face, staring at her with an intensity that made her shiver. Who? She started, but the voice cut her off. Survival ain't enough, Monday child. Revenge, now that's worth living for. And before Adwoa could ask who this stranger was or how they knew her name, the ship pitched hard to the side, and somebody further down the hold started screaming as the sea tried to swallow them all whole. The middle passage had begun, and with it, a journey into suffering so deep that even the ocean floor couldn't measure it. The ship groaned like a wounded beast as the waves tossed it side to side, and in the belly of that floating hell, Adwoa tried to twist her head to get a better look at the person who'd spoken her name. But the chains held her tight, and the darkness was thick as Mississippi mud, revealing nothing but shadows upon shadows. Who are you? Adwoa whispered, her voice cracking from thirst and fear. How you know my name? A dry chuckle came from the darkness, a sound that held no joy, only the bitter knowledge of someone who'd seen too much. I know many things, child. I know the names of the dead and the living. I know the spirits that walk between worlds. And I know you, Adwoa, daughter of the Gold Coast, marked by the Orishas for something greater than these chains. The voice belonged to a woman. That much was clear now. An older woman, her words carrying the weight of years and wisdom. They call me Mama Yamaya in these parts, though that ain't the name my mother gave me neither. Names is just skin we wear for the world to see. What matters is the soul underneath. Adwoa felt something shift inside her at them words. You a root doctor? She asked, remembering the conjure women back home who could heal with herbs and speak with spirits. I'm what needs to be, Mama Yamaya replied. And right now, child, what needs to be is your teacher. 'Cause if you're gonna survive this crossing, you gotta learn fast. The body may be bound, but the spirit, oh, the spirit can travel where these white men can't never reach. For 28 days and nights, that cursed ship cut through the Atlantic like a blade through flesh, carrying its cargo of stolen souls toward a land built on suffering. 28 days of pure hell that would haunt Adwoa till her last breath and beyond. The old ones warned us that the Middle Passage was where Africa died, and something new, something broken and remade, was born. And Lord have mercy, they was speaking truth. The conditions in that hold was worse than any nightmare the devil could conjure. Bodies pressed together so tight you couldn't tell where one person ended and another began. The air was so thick and foul it felt like breathing hot tar. Folks suffocated in their sleep, their mouths open in silent screams that nobody heard over the general misery. The dead was left chained to the living for hours, sometimes days, till the sailors bothered to haul 'em up and throw 'em overboard like garbage. Disease moved through that hold like a spirit with a vendetta. Dysentery turned the floor into a river of shit and blood. Fever made strong men delirious, calling out for mothers and children they'd never see again. The flux killed 3 people in Adwoa's immediate vicinity within the first week. Their bodies went from shaking and moaning to cold and stiff while she watched, helpless and horrified. But worst of all, sweet Jesus, worst of all, was what them sailors did when they dragged women up to the deck for exercise. That's what they called it, exercise, like we was dogs needing to stretch our legs. But everyone in that hold knew what really happened up there in the sunlight. The screams that came back down through the deck boards told the whole terrible story. One night, or maybe it was day, time had lost all meaning in that floating tomb. Adwoa heard them boots stomping overhead, heard the hatch creak open, and saw that hated shaft of light cut through the darkness. A sailor climbed down, his face twisted in disgust at the smell, and started pointing at women, selecting them like produce at market. His finger landed on Adwoa. No, Mama Yamaya said sharp and strong from beside her. Take me instead, I'm stronger. That child's too young, won't survive what you plannin'. The sailor squinted into the darkness, then shrugged. One black bitch as good as another. He unlocked Mama Yamaya's chains and dragged her toward the ladder, her bare feet scraping against the rough wood. Adwoa tried to grab her hand, but the chains held her back. No! Don't take her! Mama Yamaya turned her head, and even in that dim light, Adwoa could see the fierce determination in her eyes. Remember what I taught you, child. The prayers, the herbs, the way to speak with them that's crossed over. You're gonna need all of it where you're going. Then she was gone, hauled up through the hatch like a sack of rice. The hours that followed felt longer than the entire voyage. Adwoa pressed her ear against the deck boards, straining to hear, dreading what she might hear. Men's laughter, rough voices, and then finally, a sound that made her blood run cold. Mama Yamaya's voice, not screaming, but chanting. Chanting in a language older than the slave ships, older than colonization, older than the greed that brought them here. It was a curse, pure and powerful, and even through the thick wood, Adwoa could feel its weight. When they finally brought Mama Yamaya back down, she was bleeding from between her legs, her face bruised, her body moving like something broken, but her eyes, Lord of Glory, her eyes, still burned with a fire that couldn't be quenched. The sailors chained her back in place and left, and Mama Yamaya turned to Adwoa with a smile that was more grimace than joy. Did they? Adwoa couldn't finish the question. They took what they wanted, Mama Yamaya said, her voice a rasp. But I took something too. I marked him, child. Put a conjure on the captain himself. Within 6 moons, his manhood gonna rot off like a diseased branch. Within a year, he gonna die screaming. The spirits witnessed my words, and they don't break promises. Over the next days, Mama Yamaya taught Adwoa everything she could in whispers and gestures. How to make a mojo bag from scraps of cloth and whatever small things you could hide. A nail, a piece of bone, a lock of hair. How to pray to Ocean for protection. To Ogun for strength. To Eshu to open the paths when they seemed closed. How to read signs in dreams. In the flight of birds when you finally saw sky again. In the way water moved. The white man think he stole everything from us, Mama Yamaya said, her breath coming shallow now from the beating her body had taken. He stole our freedom, our families, our land, but he can't steal what lives in here. She tapped Adwoa's chest with a finger that trembled. Long as you remember who you was, who your people was, you still got power. You understand? Yes, Mama, Adwoa whispered, and she meant it with everything she had. But the sickness that came from what them sailors did to Mama Yamaya was spreading through her body like poison through a wound. Infection set in. Adwoa could smell it. That sweet rotten stench of flesh going bad. Mama Yamaya's skin grew hot as coals, and she started talking to people who wasn't there. Ancestors maybe, or spirits coming to guide her across. On the 21st day of that cursed voyage, Mama Yamaya grabbed Adwoa's hand with a grip surprisingly strong for someone dying. She pressed something small and sharp into Adwoa's palm. Shark tooth, she whispered. I kept it hidden in my mouth since they took us. It's got power. The shark never stops moving, never stops fighting. You keep this, and when the time comes, you use it. Cut your chains, cut your enemies, cut whatever stands between you and freedom. Don't talk like you leaving, Adwoa said, tears streaming down her face and mixing with the sweat and filth. You gonna make it. We both gonna make it. Mama Yamaya smiled, and it was the saddest, most beautiful thing Adwoa had ever seen. Oh, child, I'm already gone. Been gone since them devils put their hands on me. But my spirit gonna follow you, gonna protect you when you need it most. You ain't alone in this world, even when it feels like you is. The ancestors walk with you, always. That night, Mama Yamaya stopped breathing. Just stopped. Her chest went still, her hand went slack in Adwoa's, and her spirit slipped away quiet as smoke. Adwoa held her for as long as she could, whispering prayers in Fante and crying tears that felt like they'd never stop. When morning came, they could tell by the increased activity on deck, the sailors discovered the body. They unlocked the chains and dragged Mama Yamaya up through the hatch one last time. Adwoa listened, her whole body tense, until she heard it. The splash. They'd thrown her overboard without ceremony, without prayer, without acknowledgement that she'd been a person at all. Just tossed her to the sharks and waves like she was nothing. But Adwoa knew different. She clutched that shark tooth so tight it cut her palm, letting her blood mingle with whatever spiritual essence Mama Yamaya had left on it. And she made another vow, this one spoken aloud so the spirits and the dead, and maybe even God himself could hear. I swear by my ancestors, by the Orishas, by every soul in this hold and every body in this ocean, I'm gonna survive. And when I do, I'm gonna make them pay. The captain, the sailors, every white devil who profits from this trade. I'm gonna be the curse that haunts their bloodline. I'm gonna be the nightmare they can't wake from. I'm gonna be Mama Yamaya's vengeance made flesh. The ship rocked and groaned, and somewhere above, Adwoa heard the captain shouting orders. She thought about Mama Yamaya's curse, about his manhood rotting away, about him dying screaming, and she smiled. Not a happy smile, but the kind of smile that comes when you stop being afraid of death because you found something worth living for. Revenge. Pure, holy revenge. The remaining days of the Middle Passage crawled by with brutal sameness. More died. So many more. A man across from Adwoa went mad from the confinement, and bit off his own tongue, choking on his blood. A woman gave birth in the darkness, the baby's first cry, also its last. The tiny body passed from hand to hand until it reached someone who could whisper a prayer over it before the sailors threw it overboard. Children who'd been torn from their mothers cried themselves hoarse, then silent, then dead. But Adwoa survived. She kept that shark tooth hidden, kept Mama Yamaya's lessons close to her heart, kept her spirit fed on rage and determination. When despair tried to take her, she'd remember her village burning, her mama's scream, her daddy's blood on the red clay. She'd remember Mama Yamaya's final words and the promise she'd made. On the 28th day, the quality of the ship's movement changed. The waves felt different. The sailors' voices carried a note of excitement. They was approaching land, America, the place that would become their prison, their hell, their battleground. Adwoa pressed her face against the damp wood and whispered to herself, to Mama Yamaya's spirit, to whatever God still listened. I'm ready. Whatever comes next, I'm ready. But she wasn't. Lord have mercy. She wasn't ready at all for what waited on that shore. None of them were. The hatch opened one final time, and sunlight, real, blinding sunlight, poured into that hold like water into a drought-stricken land. The survivors squinted and cried out, their eyes burning from seeing brightness after weeks of darkness. Dealers climbed down and started unchaining bodies, separating the living from the dead, which was harder than it should have been since some folks had died with their eyes open, and some of the living had that 1,000-yard stare that meant their minds had gone wherever souls go when the body can't handle no more. They dragged Adwoa up through the hatch, and when she finally stood on that deck, her legs nearly buckled from disuse. The ocean stretched around them, blue and vast and indifferent to all the suffering it had witnessed. And there, on the horizon, she saw it. Land. America. The place built on stolen people and stolen ground, where black bodies was currency and white men's greed was gospel. A sailor grabbed her arm and shoved her toward the others, and Adwoa caught one last glimpse of the ocean where Mama Yamaya's body rested. She touched the shark tooth hidden in the wrap cloth they'd finally given her, and she whispered, I won't forget, Mama. I won't never forget. And that, children, is how Adwoa crossed the water and became Abigail, property of the New World, marked for a destiny written in blood, chains, and in vengeance that would echo through generations. The port of New Orleans in 1830 smelled like death dressed up in magnolia perfume. Adwoa, though they was already calling her by slave names, testing different ones like a man trying on hats, stumbled off that cursed ship with legs that barely remembered how to walk on solid ground. 2 years had passed since she'd been a girl child in Africa. Now she was 14, her body scarred from the branding iron and the whip, her eyes holding knowledge no child should carry. They herded the survivors into pens near the docks, wooden enclosures that reminded Adwoa of the livestock markets back home, except here, the livestock was human. Old folks say that New Orleans was where the devil himself came to do business, and standing in that holding pen with the August heat pressing down like a physical weight, Adwoa believed it. The air was thick enough to chew, heavy with humidity and the stench of unwashed bodies, fear sweat, and the nearby slaughterhouses where pigs squealed their last. A white man in a fine suit, the auction house owner, walked among them with a stick, poking and prodding, lifting lips to check teeth like they was horses. This one's got good teeth, he called to his assistant. Strong back, she'll breed well. He was talking about a woman who'd lost 3 children on the crossing, a woman whose eyes was empty as dried wells. But to him, she was just inventory. They kept him in that pen for 3 days, feeding him enough to fatten him up for sale, but not enough to satisfy the hunger that gnawed at their bellies. They was washed, roughly, with cold water and lye soap that burned the skin, and given rough cotton shifts to wear. The men was separated from the women. Families that had somehow survived the crossing together was torn apart, mothers clutching children, till the overseers beat their hands away. On the morning of the 4th day, they was led in chains through the streets of New Orleans to the auction block on Chartres Street. Adwoa had never seen a city before, never seen buildings stacked so high, never heard such a confusion of languages. French, Spanish, English, Creole, all mixing together like a babel of damnation. White folk strolled past in their fine clothes, barely glancing at the coffles of chained Africans shuffling by. To them, this was normal. This was Tuesday. The auction block itself was a raised wooden platform in the center of a courtyard, surrounded by white men in hats holding whiskey and cigars, discussing prices like they was buying furniture. Adwoa felt her stomach twist when she saw it. That cursed stage where human beings was reduced to pounds of flesh and future labor. One by one, they was brought up. An auctioneer with a voice like a carnival barker called out their supposed qualities. Strong buck, field ready, prime breeding wench, house-trained boy. The crowd bid with raised fingers and shouted numbers, and when the hammer came down, another soul was sold into bondage. When Adwoa's turn came, they pushed her up onto that platform and made her turn in a circle, slow, so the buyers could inspect the merchandise. Her shift was thin enough that every curve of her young body showed through, and she felt dozens of eyes crawling over her skin like insects. She kept her gaze fixed on a point in the distance, refusing to meet their eyes, refusing to give them the satisfaction of seeing her fear. 14 years old, fresh off the boat, the auctioneer shouted. Strong hips for breeding, good teeth, no major scarring except the brand. Probably a house girl with the right training. Do I hear $300? A hand went up, then another. The bidding climbed. $350, $400, $450. Adwoa's heart pounded so hard she thought it might break through her ribs. Where would she end up? Who would own her? Would she ever see any of the faces from the ship again? $500. The voice cut through the crowd like a knife, and Adwoa's eyes snapped to its source. A white man in a cream-colored suit and wide-brimmed hat stood at the edge of the crowd, his face shadowed, but his posture radiating wealth and authority. $500 and I'll take her now. The auctioneer grinned. Sold. To Monsieur Harlan Thibodeau of Bellevue Plantation. The hammer came down with a sound like a coffin lid closing. They unlocked Adwoa from the auction block chains and immediately locked her into new ones, attaching her to a coffle with 3 other newly purchased slaves. As they was led toward a wagon, Adwoa caught a glimpse of her new master, Thibodeau. He was maybe 40 years old with cold blue eyes and a thin mouth that looked like it had never smiled with genuine warmth. French blood, she could tell by his name and his accent. His family probably came from Haiti or Louisiana French territory, built their fortune on sugar and suffering. But it wasn't Thibodeau that made Adwoa's blood run cold. It was the man standing beside him holding the wagon reins, a Negro man, big and scarred, with a face that Adwoa recognized even though 2 years and an ocean separated them from their last meeting. Big Jacob, the African trader from the coast, the one who'd helped the Portuguese slavers raid her village, the one with the scar running from eye to jaw like the mark of Cain. Their eyes met, and for a moment time seemed to stop. Recognition flashed in his face. He knew her too, knew her as the girl child from that burning village, the one whose daddy he'd watched die, whose mama's screams he'd ignored for a handful of Portuguese coins. And then, Lord have mercy. Then he smiled. A slow, cruel smile that said he remembered everything and felt no shame whatsoever. Welcome to Bellevue, girl, he said in English, his voice a rumble like distant thunder. Master Thibodeau, he gonna work you good, and I'm gonna enjoy watching every minute of it. Adwoa felt the shark tooth, still hidden, still secret, press against her skin where she'd tucked it. Mama Yamaya's voice echoed in her memory. Revenge is worth living for. She climbed into that wagon without a word, her face a mask of submission, her heart a furnace of hate. Big Jacob cracked the reins and the wagon lurched forward, carrying Adwoa away from New Orleans and toward Bellevue Plantation, toward a destiny written in blood, chains, and vengeance that would echo through generations. As they rolled through the city and out into the bayou country, Adwoa made herself a new promise silently, in the language of her ancestors. I will survive. I will grow strong. When the time comes, I will make them all pay. Thibodeau, Big Jacob, every white devil and black trader who profits from this evil. Especially Big Jacob. He gonna die screaming, just like Mama Yamaya promised for the ship captain. I'm gonna make sure of it. The wagon rolled through cypress swamps where Spanish moss hung like the beards of drowned men, through dirt roads the color of dried blood, until finally they reached Bellevue Plantation. And what a cursed place it was, children. A white mansion rising up from the Louisiana earth like a rotted tooth, surrounded by fields of cotton stretching to the horizon, worked by bent-backed souls moving in rows like ants. Big Jacob drove the wagon straight past the big house to the slave quarters, a collection of rough wooden cabins arranged in neat rows behind the cotton gin. Each cabin was maybe 12 feet square, housing anywhere from 6 to 10 people depending on the master's mood. No windows, just slats in the walls for air. Dirt floors, a single fireplace for cooking and heat. This was home now, and it made the village Adwoa had lost look like paradise. An older woman, her name was Aunt Celia, though she wasn't nobody's real aunt, came to collect the new arrivals. Her face was lined deep with years of suffering, but her eyes still held a flicker of something that might have been kindness once upon a time. "Come on, children," she said softly. "I'll show you where you sleep, give you your work assignments." Adwoa was assigned to field work, picking cotton from before sunrise till after sunset, 6 days a week. Sunday was the Lord's Day, but even then they was expected to tend their own garden plots, mend clothes, and be ready for whatever extra tasks the master or overseer demanded. The work was brutal. Cotton bolls cut your fingers till they bled. The sun beat down merciless as Judgment Day, and the overseer, a mean-spirited white man named Crawford, rode his horse up and down the rows with a whip always ready. That first morning in the fields, Adwoa learned quick what happened to those who couldn't keep pace. A woman named Sarah, worn down from too many births and not enough food, collapsed in her row around mid-morning. Crawford was on her in seconds, his whip singing through the air. "Get up, you lazy bitch!" Crack. The whip cut across Sarah's back, opening a red line through her thin shift. "I said get up!" Sarah tried. Lord knows she tried, but her legs wouldn't hold her. Crawford kept whipping, kept shouting, till Big Jacob himself came over and dragged Sarah to the edge of the field where she could rest in the shade. Not out of mercy, but because a dead slave was worthless and needed time to become useful again. Adwoa picked faster, her fingers moving like spiders, her basket filling with white cotton that seemed to mock the darkness of her skin. She kept her head down, her mouth shut, her intelligence hidden. That was the first lesson of survival in the quarters. Never let them see how smart you are. Smart niggers made white folks nervous, and nervous white folks was dangerous. But at night, when the work was done and the slaves gathered in their cabins, Adwoa let herself learn. She listened to the old ones talk about herbs growing in the swamps. Which ones could heal wounds? Which ones could end a pregnancy before a child could be born into bondage? Which ones could kill a man slow enough that it looked like natural sickness? She learned the spirituals that carried double meanings, songs about crossing Jordan that really meant crossing into freedom. She learned which overseers was cruel and which was merely indifferent, which white folks might look the other way and which ones would report you for the smallest infraction. And she learned about the whipping post. Every plantation had one, and Bellevue's stood near the cotton gin like a monument to cruelty. It was a thick wooden pole with iron rings bolted to it, stained dark with years of blood. Slaves who committed infractions, talking back, working too slow, trying to run, looking a white person in the eye too long, was stripped to the waist and tied to that post while the overseer or master administered punishment. Adwoa's first whipping came 3 weeks after she arrived at Bellevue. Her crime? She'd been caught gathering herbs in the swamp after dark without permission. Big Jacob himself had reported her to Thibodeau, that damn traitor's eyes gleaming with satisfaction as he delivered the news. They dragged her to the whipping post at dusk, when the other slaves was returning from the fields, forced to watch as a lesson. Crawford tied her wrists to the iron rings, pulling her arms up high enough that her toes barely touched the ground. Then he ripped her shift down to her waist, exposing her back to the evening air and the eyes of the master. Thibodeau himself came to watch, standing on the porch of the big house with a glass of whiskey in his hand. 20 lashes, he called out, his voice casual as if he was ordering supper. "And make them count, Crawford." The first lash was fire. Pure, liquid fire that exploded across Adwoa's shoulders and made her bite down on her tongue to keep from screaming. The second came before she could catch her breath, and the third, and the fourth. By the 10th, she couldn't hold back the cries anymore. By the 15th, she felt blood running down her back in hot rivers. By the 20th, she was nearly unconscious, held up only by the ropes around her wrists. When Crawford finally untied her, she collapsed into the dirt like a rag doll. Aunt Celia and another woman dragged her back to the cabin and laid her on her stomach on a rough pallet. They washed her wounds with water mixed with salt. It burned like hellfire itself. Then packed them with moss and wrapped her in clean cloth. "You gotta be more careful, child," Aunt Celia whispered, her old hands gentle despite their calluses. "Them white folks don't need much excuse to hurt us, you understand?" Adwoa nodded, teeth gritted against the pain. But in her heart, she was making calculations. She'd learned where Big Jacob slept. She'd learned which herbs could poison without leaving obvious signs. She'd learned that Thibodeau liked his evening whiskey, and that he sometimes walked the grounds alone at night. Most importantly, she'd learned that the shark tooth Mama Yamaya gave her was sharp enough to cut rope. She'd tested it secretly, sawing through a piece of hemp in the darkness of her cabin. 3 days later, when she'd healed enough to work again, something happened that made everything more complicated. Thibodeau called her to the big house. Not to the back door where slaves usually entered, but to the front parlor where white guests was entertained. He sat in a velvet chair, still holding that damn whiskey glass, his cold blue eyes studying her like she was a puzzle he was trying to solve. "You're an interesting one, Abigail," he said, using the slave name they'd given her. "Crawford says you work faster than women twice your age. Big Jacob says you was gathering roots like you know what they're for. And I've noticed you watching things, listening when you think nobody's paying attention." Adwoa kept her eyes down, her posture submissive, every muscle in her body tense. Thibodeau leaned forward. "Tell me, girl, you speak French, don't you? I've heard you whispering it when you think nobody's listening." Adwoa's blood ran cold. How did he know? She'd been so careful, only muttering the French words she'd picked up from the few Africans who'd been through French territories, never speaking loud enough to be overheard. Or so she'd thought. "Answer me," Thibodeau said, his voice soft but carrying an edge sharp as broken glass. "Oui, maître," Adwoa whispered, the French words tasting like poison on her tongue. "Un peu." Thibodeau smiled, and it was the smile of a snake that just spotted a mouse. "Interesting indeed. Very interesting. You're dismissed for now, Abigail. But we'll talk again soon, very soon." As Adwoa walked back to the quarters, her mind raced faster than her heart. Thibodeau knew she was intelligent, knew she had skills beyond picking cotton. And that knowledge was either going to be her salvation or her damnation. She just couldn't tell which yet. 4 years crawled by like wounded animals. Adwoa, they called her Abigail now. And she answered to it, though she kept her true name locked in her heart, had grown into a woman under the Louisiana sun. 18 years old, her body strong from field work, her spirit hardened by daily humiliation and nightly prayers to ancestors who sometimes felt too far away to hear. Thibodeau had moved her from fieldwork to housework after that conversation about French. She served meals, cleaned rooms, and listened to white folks talk like she wasn't even there, like she was furniture with ears. She learned their secrets, who was cheating at cards, who was in debt, which neighbor was creeping around with which neighbor's wife. Information was power, and Abigail collected it like gold dust. But power didn't protect her from what was coming. It happened on a night heavy with summer rain, the kind that made the air so thick you could barely breathe. Thibodeau had been drinking heavier than usual. His wife was visiting relatives in New Orleans, and the big house was empty except for Abigail finishing her evening duties. She heard his footsteps before she saw him, boots on hardwood, moving with the unsteady rhythm of a man deep in his cups. When she turned around, he was standing in the doorway of the parlor, blocking her exit, his eyes hot with something that made her stomach twist. "Abigail," he said, her slave name sounding like a curse. "Come here." She knew what was coming. Every enslaved woman knew. The old ones warned us. White men took what they wanted, when they wanted, and there wasn't no law, no God, no justice that would stop them. "Master, I should get back to the quarters," she started. But he was across the room faster than she expected, his hand gripping her arm hard enough to bruise. I said, "Come here." What happened next? Lord have mercy, what happened next was violence dressed up as property rights. He forced himself on her right there on the parlor floor, his whiskey breath hot on her neck, his hands brutal and possessive. She tried to fight, clawed at his face, but he hit her hard enough that stars exploded behind her eyes. When it was over, he stood up, adjusted his clothes, and looked down at her like she was dirt on his boots. "Clean yourself up," he said. "And if you tell anyone, I'll have you whipped till you can't walk, then sold down river, you understand?" Abigail nodded, her body shaken, her soul screaming in a language older than English or French. He left her there on that floor, and she lay still for what felt like hours, staring at the ceiling and feeling something inside her die and something else, something dark and vengeful, be born. When she finally made it back to the quarters, Aunt Celia took one look at her torn dress and bruised face and knew. Didn't say nothing, just heated water and helped Abigail wash the violation away, though both of them knew some stains don't never come clean. "Drink this," Aunt Celia whispered, pressing a cup of bitter tea into Abigail's hands. "Tansy and pennyroyal, might keep you from..." But it was too late. Abigail's body had already betrayed her, already started the process of growing Thibodeau's seed into a child she didn't want, couldn't want, but had no choice about. 9 months later, in the depths of winter when frost made the cotton fields silver and deadly, Abigail's water broke. The pain started at dawn and lasted all through the day and into the night. Aunt Celia served as midwife, her experienced hands guiding a baby into the world while Abigail screamed curses in 3 languages. The child was a boy, perfect and tiny, his skin the color of café au lait, light enough that everyone would know his daddy was white, dark enough that the law still called him property. "What you gonna name him?" Aunt Celia asked, wrapping the baby in clean cloth. Abigail looked at her son, Thibodeau's son, her son, a child born from violence but breathing with innocent life, and made a decision that surprised even herself. "Kofi," she whispered, giving him a name from her mother's people, a name that meant born on Friday, even though he'd actually arrived on a Tuesday. "His name is Kofi." "That ain't Christian," Aunt Celia warned. "Master might not like..." "I don't care what Master likes," Abigail said, her voice stronger than it had been in months. "He took everything else from me. He ain't taken my son's name." She held Kofi close, feeling his tiny heart beat against her chest, and something shifted inside her. This child, half her blood, half her enemies, was innocent, didn't ask to be born into bondage, didn't deserve to pay for his father's sins. But Thibodeau was gonna pay for all of it. The door to the cabin burst open, letting in a blast of cold air in Big Jacob's massive frame. "Master wants to see the baby," he announced, his scarred face unreadable. "No," Abigail said, holding Kofi tighter. Big Jacob's expression didn't change. "Wasn't asking, girl. Master says bring the baby, you bring the baby." Aunt Celia helped Abigail to her feet, and together they walked through the freezing night to the big house, Abigail clutching Kofi to her chest like he was made of glass. Every step hurt, her body still bleeding from childbirth, her legs weak as water. But she walked with her head high. Thibodeau was waiting in the same parlor where he'd violated her. He looked at the baby with cold calculation, like he was evaluating livestock. "He's light," Thibodeau observed. "Good. Might be worth something if he takes after his father." The words hit Abigail like a slap. If he takes after his father, not my son, not even acknowledgement of blood, just evaluation of property. Thibodeau stepped closer, reached out a finger to touch Kofi's tiny hand. The baby grabbed it instinctively, and something flickered across the master's face. Surprise, recognition, regret. But it was gone in an instant, replaced by his usual coldness. "This boy is mine too," Thibodeau said, not looking at Abigail. "Mine to keep, mine to sell, mine to do with as I please. But I'm gonna raise him different. Train him for housework, maybe even teach him to read and write. He's got my blood even if the law says he's a slave. That counts for something." Abigail's heart sank. She'd hoped, desperately, foolishly hoped, that Thibodeau would ignore Kofi, would let her raise him in the quarters away from the big house and white folks' attention. But now she understood. Thibodeau was claiming her son, not as a father, but as an owner with special investment. "Yes, master," she whispered, because what else could she say? "You can go." Thibodeau dismissed them with a wave. "Keep him healthy. I'll send for him when he's old enough to learn proper manners." As they walked back through the night, Abigail looked down at Kofi's sleeping face and made yet another vow. "This child will know freedom. I don't know how, I don't know when, but I swear by Mama Yamaya's spirit and the shark tooth I still carry, this child will know freedom. Even if I have to burn Bellevue to the ground to give it to him." Years rolled by like the Mississippi, slow, heavy, carrying everything downstream toward an uncertain destination. Kofi grew into a bright-eyed boy who learned to navigate two worlds: the big house where Thibodeau taught him numbers and letters, and the quarters where his mama whispered his true name in the language of their stolen homeland. Abigail bore two more children in them years. Kwame came when Kofi was 3, another forced pregnancy after Thibodeau summoned her to the big house on a night his wife was away. Then Amina, her only daughter, born from yet another violation when Abigail was 24. 3 children, all carrying Thibodeau's blood, all legally his property, all loved fiercely by a mother whose heart was both broken and unbreakable. But something was changing in the quarters. Whispers traveled from plantation to plantation like wind through cypress trees, carried by hired-out slaves, by preachers allowed to move between properties, by the occasional free Negro who risked everything to bring news. Nat Turner's rebellion in Virginia, Denmark Vesey's conspiracy in Charleston, stories of the Underground Railroad, that secret network of safe houses and brave conductors guiding souls to freedom in the North. Each tale was like kindling added to a fire that had been smearing in enslaved hearts since the first chains was forged. Abigail started gathering people in the deep woods behind the quarters on Sunday nights, when the white folks thought they was having prayer meetings, and they was praying, "Yes, Lord," but not the kind of prayers the master would approve of. These was prayers for deliverance mixed with practical plans for resistance. "My cousin on the Henderson plantation," a field hand named Moses whispered one night. "He says there's a conductor coming through next month. White woman, believe it or not. Quaker. Says she'll take whoever's ready to risk the journey." Abigail's heart leaped. The North Star, they called it the drinking gourd in their coded songs, beckoned like a promise. But she looked at her 3 children sleeping in the cabin and knew the terrible mathematics of escape. 4 people made more noise than 1, left more tracks, moved slower. And Thibodeau watched Kofi like a hawk watches a prized possession. "We need a map," said Sarah, the woman who'd collapsed in the cotton fields years ago but survived. "Need to know which roads is safe, which rivers to cross, where the patrol routes run." "I can get that," Abigail said quietly. "Master keeps maps in his study. I clean there twice a week." The circle of conspirators grew slowly, carefully. They taught each other what freedom seekers needed to know. Follow the North Star, wade in water to lose the dogs, trust the moss growing on the north side of trees. Listen for the owl calls that might be conductors signaling. Abigail shared what Mama Yamaya had taught her. Which roots could sustain you when food ran out, which herbs could treat wounds, how to make yourself invisible in the spiritual sense when patrollers came too close. She also taught her children. Kofi, now 12 and sharp as a tack, learned to read not just the Bible verses Thibodeau assigned, but also the maps and documents his mama smuggled from the big house. Kwame, 9 years old with his father's light eyes and his mother's fierce heart, learned to move through the swamps silent as smoke. And little Amina, just 6, learned the old songs in the old language, the ones that carried messages underneath their melodies. "Mama," Kofi asked one night when the younger ones was sleeping, Why you teach us all this if we ain't gonna run?" Abigail looked at her firstborn, this child of violence who'd somehow become her greatest joy, and spoke truth. "Maybe we run, maybe we don't. But either way, you gonna know you're more than what they say you are. You gonna know your people's names, your people's language, your people's power. That knowledge, baby, that's freedom even chains can't take." But Bellevue had eyes everywhere, and secrets in slave quarters was like water in a sieve. Eventually something leaked. The first sign of trouble came when a new slave arrived, a man named Ezekiel, who claimed he'd been sold from a plantation in Mississippi. He was friendly, eager to help, asked lots of questions about who gathered where and when. Too many questions. Moses noticed first. "That Ezekiel," he told Abigail one Sunday, "he smelled like Judas to me." Abigail agreed, but by then it was too late. They'd already let him hear too much, see too much. She started sleeping with the shark tooth under her pallet, a talisman and a weapon both. 3 weeks later, the hammer fell. Crawford the overseer, along with Big Jacob and 4 patrollers, raided the quarters at dawn. They dragged Moses from his cabin, his wife screaming and his children crying, and found hidden under his floor a stolen map of Louisiana with routes marked in coal dust. They took him to the whipping post, but this time it wasn't just 20 lashes. This was punishment meant to send a message. They beat him until his back was raw meat, until he couldn't stand, until his blood made mud of the dust beneath the post. And then they made him talk. Hurt a man bad enough, long enough, he'll say anything to make it stop. "Abigail," Moses gasped through broken teeth and split lips, his eyes begging forgiveness even as his mouth betrayed her. She the one. She got the information. She the one teaching folks to read the stars. Abigail stood with the other slaves forced to witness. Her children clutched close and felt the world tilt sideways. Kofi's hand found hers and squeezed tight. Kwame pressed against her leg. Amina whimpered softly. Thibodeau stepped forward from where he'd been watching from the big house porch, his face cold as January ice. His eyes found Abigail in the crowd, and when he spoke, his voice carried across the yard like a judge pronouncing sentence. "Abigail, step forward." Every instinct screamed at her to run, but she had 3 children and nowhere to go. She walked toward the master with her head high, even though her legs trembled, even though she could feel the noose tightening around everything she'd built. But before Thibodeau could speak again, Big Jacob stepped close to the master and whispered something in his ear. Thibodeau's expression shifted. Surprise, then calculation, then something that might have been dark amusement. "Is that so?" Thibodeau said to Big Jacob, then louder to the assembled slaves. "It seems we have multiple traitors among us. Moses will hang at sunset as an example." A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. Hanging was rare, dead slaves was worthless slaves. But rebellion got special punishment. "As for Abigail," Thibodeau continued, his eyes never leaving her face, "she'll receive 20 lashes tomorrow. But first, I want her to watch what happens to those who lead others astray." Big Jacob's scarred face split into a satisfied smile, and Abigail understood. He'd whispered something to save her from immediate hanging, but only because he wanted her to suffer longer. That damn traitor was playing a deeper game than she'd realized. As they dragged Moses toward the tree where a noose already waited, Abigail clutched her children and whispered a prayer to Mama Yemaya, to the Orishas, to any spirit that might be listening. "Give me strength. Give me time. Give me vengeance." The sun set red as blood, and Moses' body swung gentle in the evening breeze, a grim reminder that dreams of freedom came with a terrible price. The whipping came at dawn, as promised. 20 lashes that opened Abigail's back like a cotton boll splitting under the sun. Each strike a reminder that resistance in this world came with a price written in blood and screaming. But she didn't beg, didn't plead for mercy. She bit down on the leather strap they gave her and counted each lash like a debt she'd collect later, with interest. When Crawford finally cut her down, it was Big Jacob who carried her back to the cabin. His massive hands was gentle, too gentle, and that scared her more than the pain. "Why'd you save me?" Abigail gasped as he laid her on her pallet. Could have let Thibodeau hang me with Moses. Big Jacob's scarred face was unreadable in the dim light filtering through the cabin slats. Dead slaves don't suffer, he said simply. And you deserve to suffer a good long time for what you've been plotting. He started to leave, but Abigail's voice stopped him. I know you. Know your face from before the water, before the chains. You was there when they burned my village. You helped them. Big Jacob froze, his broad shoulders tense. For a long moment, he didn't turn around. Then slowly, he faced her again, and his expression was something terrible. Half shame, half defiance, all wrapped in decades of survival. You was just a girl child then, he said quietly. Probably don't remember the details, but yeah, I was there. Had a choice. Help the slavers or get chained up myself. I chose to live. You chose wrong, Abigail spat, ignoring the pain that flared across her ruined back. Chose to betray your own people for what? Few years of being the master's favorite dog? Big Jacob's jaw tightened, and for a second she thought he might hit her, but instead, he did something worse. He smiled, slow and cruel. You think you better than me? You think your little rebellion attempts make you righteous? We both survive in the only way we know how, girl. Difference is, I accepted what I am. You still fight in a war you already lost. He moved closer, kneeling beside her pallet so his face was level with hers. His breath smelled like tobacco and old regrets. Let me tell you something Thibodeau told me yesterday, something you're gonna want to hear. Abigail's heart stuttered. What? Master's planning to sell your boys. Kofi and Kwame both. Got a buyer coming from Texas next month. Plantation owner who specializes in young male slaves. Trains them up for hard labor. Thibodeau figures Kofi's learning is making him uppity. And Kwame's got too much of your fire in him. Better to sell him now, get good money, before they become problems. The words hit harder than the whip ever could. Abigail tried to sit up, but her back screamed in protest and she fell back gasping. No, he can't. They his blood, his property, Big Jacob corrected. Blood don't matter when profit's involved. You should know that by now. Tears burned Abigail's eyes, but she refused to let them fall. Not in front of this traitor, this man who'd sold his soul so many times, he probably couldn't remember what it looked like whole. Why you telling me this? Big Jacob stood, brushing dust from his pants. Because I want you to know, there ain't nothing you can do about it. Want you to feel what I felt when they chained me. That helplessness, that rage with nowhere to put it. You've been looking at me with judgment in your eyes for months now. Well, now you're gonna understand. We all slaves here, Abigail. Some of us just honest about it. He walked toward the door, but paused at the threshold. Oh, and one more thing. That scar you keep staring at? He traced the line running from eye to jaw. Got this fighting a slaver who tried to rape my sister. Killed him with my bare hands. Watched him choke on his own blood. They gave me a choice, die for murder or work for them. I chose to live. Been living ever since. The confession hung in the air like smoke. It didn't excuse what he'd done, didn't wash away the blood on his hands. But it complicated him in ways Abigail didn't want to acknowledge. Monsters was easier to hate when they stayed monstrous. You still a traitor, she whispered. And you still a fool, he replied. But we both breathin', and in this world, that's something. After he left, Abigail lay on her pallet and let the tears come. For Moses swinging from that tree. For her boys about to be sold like cattle. For the village she'd lost and the mother whose voice she could barely remember. For Mama Yamaya who died giving her that shark tooth, which felt less like a weapon and more like a joke now. What good was a shark tooth against the whole machinery of slavery? What good was root work and conjure when Big Jacob could whisper in the master's ear and destroy everything? Aunt Celia came in later with fresh moss for the wounds and bitter tea for the pain. Heard about the boys, she said softly, her old hands shaking as she tended Abigail's back. Heard Big Jacob told you. Is it true? Don't know for certain, but I know Thibodeau been talking to a man from Texas. Know your Kofi's been getting too smart for comfort, asking questions about abolitionists, about free states, about laws that might protect mixed-blood children. Master don't like smart slaves. Abigail closed her eyes, thinking fast despite the pain clouding her mind. 1 month. She had 1 month before the Texas buyer came. 1 month to figure out something, anything, to save her sons. The Underground Railroad, she whispered. The conductor Moses mentioned. She still coming? Aunt Celia's hand stilled. Child, you just got 20 lashes for plotting escape. You really gonna? I ain't got a choice, Abigail said, her voice hard as iron. They take my boys. I got nothing left to lose. Might as well die trying to save them than live watching them disappear. The old woman sighed, deep and heavy. Conductor's coming in 3 weeks. White Quaker woman named Rachel. She'll be staying at the Beaumont place 10 miles north, pretending to visit relatives. Word is she'll take anyone brave enough to run. 3 weeks before the buyer arrived. It was tight, dangerous, probably suicidal, but it was a chance, and chances was all enslaved people ever got. I need to talk to Big Jacob again, Abigail said, a plan forming in her mind even as her back throbbed with fresh agony. Why in God's name? Because he's a survivor, Abigail said, and survivors know things other folks don't. Know how patrols move, know which overseers can be bribed, know the difference between a plan that might work and one that'll get you killed. You think he'll help you? Abigail thought about the scar on his face, the story of his sister, the complicated truth that people could be both monster and victim depending on the light you saw them in. No, she admitted. But I think he might enjoy watching me try. And maybe, just maybe, I can use that. Outside, the night settled heavy over Bellevue Plantation, and somewhere in the darkness, Big Jacob sharpened his knife and wondered if Abigail really was the fool he'd called her, or if she was something far more dangerous. A woman with nothing left to lose. The wounds on Abigail's back was still angry and fresh when Thibodeau summoned her to the big house again. 2 weeks had passed since Moses's hanging. 2 weeks of Abigail plotting and scheming while pretending to be broken. She'd approached Big Jacob 3 times, each conversation a careful dance of manipulation and mutual suspicion. He hadn't agreed to help, but he hadn't refused neither, which meant she'd planted seeds of doubt in that complicated mind of his. But now, climbing the steps to the big house with her back screaming protest at every movement, Abigail knew what this summons meant. Thibodeau's wife had left again for another extended visit to her sister in Natchez. The master was alone, and Abigail was his favorite possession to violate when loneliness and whiskey mixed in his blood. He was waiting in his bedroom this time, not even bothering with the pretense of cleaning duties or servant work. Just sat on the edge of his 4-poster bed with a glass of bourbon in hand, his eyes already glazed with drink and desire. "Close the door," he ordered. Abigail did, her mind racing. She'd hidden the shark tooth in the hem of her dress, she always did now, but pulling it out would mean instant death, and her children still needed her. Kofi, Kwame, and little Amina was dependent on their mama to save them, which meant she had to endure this one more time. Just one more time. "Come here," Thibodeau said, his voice thick. She crossed the room with her eyes fixed on a point above his head, somewhere distant where her spirit could hide while her body did what it had to do. But when he grabbed her arm and pulled her close, she smelled something different on him tonight. Not just bourbon, but something bitter, almost medicinal. "You know why I keep you, Abigail?" He slurred, his fingers already working at her dress. "Not just because you're pretty, though you are. It's because you got spirit, fire. Every other slave in this house looks at me with fear or hatred, but you look at me like I'm already dead and you're just waiting for the body to realize it." His words sent ice through her veins. Did he know about her plans? Had Big Jacob betrayed her again? "Master, I don't," she started, but he pressed a finger to her lips. "Shh, don't ruin it with lying. I like the truth in your eyes even when your mouth speaks submission." He pulled her onto the bed, his movements rough and graceless from drink. "Maybe that's why I keep putting babies in you. Trying to break that spirit, bend it to my will. Hasn't worked yet, but I'm a persistent man." The violation came swift and brutal, just like the previous times. Abigail closed her eyes and recited prayers in Fante, in French, in English, any words that could transport her mind away from what her body was enduring. She thought about Mama Yamaya's face, about her mama's village before it burned, about the North Star waiting in the sky like a promise. When it was over, Thibodeau rolled away and immediately started snoring, the bourbon finally claiming him completely. Abigail lay still for a moment, feeling the familiar shame and rage war inside her chest. Then she noticed something, a small leather pouch on his nightstand, partially hidden under his pocket watch. Her heart stuttered. She recognized that pouch. It was the kind conjure women and root doctors carried, filled with herbs and powders for various purposes. What was Thibodeau doing with rootwork materials? Moving careful as a cat, Abigail slipped from the bed and crept to the nightstand. Her fingers trembled as she opened the pouch and sniffed its contents. Pennyroyal and tansy, the same herbs Aunt Celia had given her years ago to prevent pregnancy, but mixed with something else, something darker that smelled like graveyard dirt and sulfur. Gopher dust, a conjure powder meant to curse, to harm, to bring misfortune. Someone had been working roots against Thibodeau. But who? A floorboard creaked behind her, and Abigail spun around to find Big Jacob standing in the doorway, his massive frame blocking the exit. Her hand went to the shark tooth hidden in her dress, but he raised a hand in a gesture of peace. "Master sent for me earlier," he whispered, nodding toward the unconscious Thibodeau. "Wanted me to bring him that pouch. Said he was feeling poorly. Thought someone might be conjuring against him. Asked me to find out who." Abigail's mind raced. "And did you?" Big Jacob's scarred face split into something that might have been a smile. "Found lots of things. Found out the white Quaker woman is staying at the Beaumont place like you heard. Found out the Texas buyer's coming a week earlier than expected. 9 days from now. Found out Thibodeau's been having stomach pains and nightmares ever since he started drinking from his special bourbon bottle." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small vial, holding it up to the candlelight. Dark liquid swirled inside. "Also found out that this bourbon bottle gets refilled every week by someone who knows exactly which herbs cause slow poison. Bitter enough that a man needs strong drink to cover the taste." Abigail's breath caught. "You?" "Not me directly," Big Jacob said. "But I know who, and I know why. See, Thibodeau killed that person's child 5 years ago. Beat him to death for spilling water on his boots. That person's been waiting patient for the right moment to balance the scales." He set the vial on the nightstand next to the conjure pouch. "I'm telling you this because you got 9 days to get your children out. 9 days before that Texas buyer comes and your boys disappear forever. 9 days before Thibodeau figures out someone's poisoning him and starts killing suspects." "Why help me now?" Abigail demanded. "You've been working against me for months." Big Jacob's expression hardened. "Because I'm tired, Abigail. Tired of being the master's dog. Tired of watching children sold like livestock. Tired of carrying this scar and remembering what I gave up to earn it. I can't run. Too old, too visible, too broken. But you got fire enough for all of us." He moved toward the door, then paused. "The night of the escape, dogs'll need to be handled. Patrol route'll need to be clear. I can manage that, but only if you move fast and smart. Get your children, get to the Beaumont place, and don't look back. Understand?" Abigail nodded, her throat too tight for words. "And Abigail?" Big Jacob's voice dropped to barely a whisper. "If you make it north, if you find freedom, remember us. Remember the ones who couldn't run. Tell our stories. Don't let the world forget what happened in places like Bellevue." Then he was gone, disappearing into the dark hallway like a ghost. Abigail stood alone in that bedroom with Thibodeau snoring, and the evidence of slow poison on his nightstand. Her hand went to her belly, already feeling the familiar signs of pregnancy beginning again. The tenderness, the nausea, the knowledge that her body was betraying her one more time. But this time would be different. This time she wouldn't let Thibodeau claim another child. This time she'd run before the baby could become another piece of property in his ledger. She slipped out of the big house and back to the quarters where Kofi, Kwame, and Amina slept innocent and unaware of the storm coming. 9 days. She had 9 days to prepare for the most dangerous gamble of her life. As she lay on her pallet, one hand pressed to her still flat belly and the other clutching the shark tooth, Abigail whispered a prayer to Mama Yamaya. "Guide us through the dark water. Guide us to freedom. And if we die trying, let our spirits haunt this cursed place until Bellevue burns to ash and memory." The night offered no answer except the distant sound of hound dogs howling and the heavy silence of the bayou waiting to swallow whatever came next. The night they chose to run was moonless, thick with clouds that swallowed the stars whole. Abigail woke her children in the darkest hour before dawn. Kofi at 13, Kwame at 10, and little Amina just 7 years old. She pressed a finger to each mouth before they could speak, her eyes telling them everything they needed to know. Tonight. Now. Freedom or death. They'd been preparing for this moment in whispers and stolen glances. Each child had a small bundle hidden under their pallet. Dried corn, a tin cup, a knife stolen from the big house kitchen. Abigail had the shark tooth, a vial of pennyroyal tea to end the pregnancy growing in her belly, and a desperate prayer on her lips. Big Jacob had kept his word. When they slipped from the cabin, the guard dogs was silent, drugged with meat laced with herbs only a root doctor would know. The patrol route that usually circled the quarters every hour had shifted, moving toward the cotton fields instead. A path through the darkness had opened like Moses parting the Red Sea, and Abigail grabbed her children's hands and stepped through. They moved quick and quiet through the slave quarters, past cabins where other families slept unaware, or maybe just too scared to risk what the runaways was risking. Aunt Celia stood in her doorway, a shadow among shadows, and pressed something into Abigail's hand as they passed. A mojo bag warm with conjure work, protection sewn with prayers and ancestors' blessings. "Go with God," the old woman whispered, "and with the spirits of all who died dreaming of this moment." Then they was past the quarters, past the cotton gin where Moses had died swinging, past the big house where Thibodeau slept his poisoned sleep, into the bayou country where cypress trees rose like ancient guardians and the water reflected nothing but darkness. Abigail had studied this route in her mind 100 times, memorizing the maps she'd seen in Thibodeau's study. 10 miles north to the Beaumont place. Cross the bayou at the shallow ford near the Twisted Oak. Follow the creek upstream till it met the old logging road. Stay off the main paths where patrollers rode. Trust the North Star when the clouds finally broke. But the bayou had other ideas. The water that looked shallow by daylight turned treacherous in darkness, full of hidden sinkholes and roots that grabbed at ankles like skeletal hands. Snakes moved through the shallows, disturbed by their passage. Mosquitoes swarmed thick as smoke, biting exposed skin till blood ran in tiny rivulets. Kwame stumbled first, his foot catching on a submerged log. He went down hard, splashed loud enough to wake the dead, and came up sputtering and scared. Abigail grabbed him, pulling him close and whispering fierce in his ear. "Quiet, baby. Quiet as the grave or we'll be in one." They pressed on, Abigail carrying Amina when the child's little legs gave out, Kofi leading the way with the confidence of youth and desperation. Hours crawled by. The bayou seemed endless, a labyrinth designed by the devil himself to trap freedom seekers in its twisted paths. Then, cutting through the night sounds of frogs and insects, came something that froze Abigail's blood. Dogs. Not the drugged hounds from Bellevue, but fresh ones, distant still but closing fast. Barking that spoke of hunger and trained viciousness. "Mama!" Kofi's voice trembled. "Run!" Abigail said. "Run!" They crashed through the swamp like startled deer, abandoned stealth for speed. Branches whipped their faces. Water splashed loud as thunder. Behind them, the dogs got closer, their barks mixing with men's voices. Patrollers, at least 3 of them, maybe more. "Them niggers can't be far," a white voice called. "Dogs got the scent good." Abigail's mind raced. They couldn't outrun dogs. Couldn't fight armed men. The plan was falling apart like wet paper and her children was going to pay the price. Then Kwame, sweet Kwame who always seemed lost in dreams, grabbed his mama's arm and pointed to a stand of thick brush near a fallen cypress. "There," he gasped. "Hide there, I'll lead them away." "No," Abigail started, but Kwame was already moving, already splashing loud through the water in a different direction, yelling to draw the dog's attention. "Follow me, you bastards." His young voice cracked with fear and courage both. "Come and get me." The dogs pivoted, their barks changing pitch as they caught new movement. The patrollers followed, crashing through the underbrush after the noise. Abigail wanted to scream, wanted to run after her son, but Kofi pulled her and Amina into the brush, pressing them flat into the mud and rot beneath the fallen tree. They lay there barely breathing, hearts hammering loud enough to give them away, while the sounds of pursuit faded into the distance. Minutes passed like hours. The bayou settled back into its normal rhythms. Frogs, insects, the occasional splash of something hunting in the dark. But no Kwame, no sound of her boy returning. "We have to go back," Abigail whispered, starting to rise. Kofi held her down with surprising strength. "Mama, no. Kwame did this so we could make it. If we go back, his sacrifice means nothing. He's my baby. He's my brother," Kofi said, tears streaming down his face but his voice steady. "And he's braver than any of us. We honor him by surviving, by getting to freedom and telling his story." Abigail wanted to argue, wanted to fight, wanted to tear the whole world apart to get her son back. But Amina was shaking against her chest, and Kofi was right. They had to keep moving or Kwame's courage would be wasted. They crawled from their hiding place and continued north, moving slower now, more careful. Every snap of a twig made them freeze. Every distant sound could be patrollers circling back. Dawn was breaking gray and miserable when they finally reached the edge of the Beaumont property. The main house sat quiet in the early light, white columns gleaming like false promises. But behind it, barely visible through the morning mist, was a small cabin where smoke rose from a chimney. The conductor. It had to be. Abigail looked back one last time toward the bayou where her son had disappeared into the darkness, leading death away from his family. Her hand went to her belly where another life was growing, a life she'd planned to end but now wasn't so sure about. "Mama," Amina whispered, her small voice broken. "Is Kwame coming?" Abigail pulled her daughter close, pulled Kofi close too, and told the truth because lies wouldn't honor what Kwame had given them. "I don't know, baby, but we gonna remember him, gonna tell his story till our last breath. Gonna make sure the world knows there was a boy named Kwame who loved his family more than his own life." They moved toward the cabin where freedom waited, carrying grief like chains that no conductor could ever break. But freedom wasn't waiting in that cabin, only betrayal, dressed in Quaker gray. The woman who opened the door looked kind enough, middle-aged, soft-spoken, with gentle eyes that seemed to promise salvation. "Come in, quickly," she whispered, pulling Abigail and the children inside. "You must be frozen and exhausted. Let me get you something warm to drink." Abigail should have known, should have trusted the ice that formed in her belly the moment she crossed that threshold. Should have listened to Mama Yamaya's voice whispering from beyond, "Run, child, run now." But exhaustion and grief had dulled her instincts. She let the woman, who claimed her name was Rachel, settle them by the fire. Let her serve them hot broth that tasted strange, bitter underneath the salt. Let her tuck a blanket around Amina's shaking shoulders. 20 minutes later, when Abigail's vision started swimming and her limbs went heavy as iron, she understood. The broth had been drugged. Rachel wasn't a conductor. She was a slave catcher's wife, earning blood money by tricking desperate souls with false promises of freedom. "I'm sorry," Rachel said, and she almost sounded like she meant it. "But the reward for returning runaways, we need the money. My husband's debts." Abigail tried to stand, tried to reach for the shark tooth hidden in her dress, but her body wouldn't obey. She collapsed on the floor, watching helplessly as Kofi and Amina slumped over beside her, the drugs taking them down gentle as sleep. The last thing she saw before darkness claimed her was Rachel opening the door to let in 3 white men with rifles and chains. When consciousness returned, it came with pain. Abigail's wrists was bound behind her back, iron cutting into her skin. She was moving, no, being dragged. through water that soaked her dress and made her shiver. Night had fallen again, or maybe it was still the same endless night. Time had lost all meaning. "Mama?" Kofi's voice, scared and young despite his 13 years. "I'm here, baby," Abigail managed, her tongue thick from whatever Rachel had put in that damned broth. They was back at Bellevue, back in the bayou behind the plantation, and standing on the bank, holding a lantern that cast demon shadows across his face, was Thibodeau himself. He looked terrible, skin pale and sweaty, eyes sunken from the slow poison working through his system, but his rage burned bright enough to light up the darkness. "Did you really think you'd escape me?" he asked, his voice carrying across the water. "Did you think I wouldn't find out about your pathetic little plan?" Beside him stood Big Jacob, and Abigail's heart shattered. The traitor had played her one last time, given her hope just so he could watch it die. But wait, Big Jacob's face wasn't triumphant. It was grieved, and his hands was bound too, she realized with shock. He was a prisoner, same as her. "Found this one helping them," Crawford, the overseer, said, giving Big Jacob a shove toward the water's edge. "Drugged the dogs, changed the patrol route, even gave her a map. Been playing both sides like the snake he is." Thibodeau's laugh was bitter as medicine. Of course he was. Jacob always did have a weakness for lost causes. He turned his fevered eyes on Abigail. "But you're the real disappointment. I gave you privilege, made your children house servants instead of field hands. And this is how you repay me. By stealing my property? By running like a common field nigger? They ain't property," Abigail spat, finding her voice despite the drugs still fogged in her system. "They're human beings, my children. And you're the thief who stole their freedom before they was even born." Thibodeau's face twisted with something between rage and pain. "Chain her in the shallow water," he ordered Crawford, "where the gators feed. Let nature do what the law won't let me do quick." The overseer and 2 patrollers dragged Abigail deeper into the bayou, the water rising from her ankles to her knees to her waist. They chained her to a cypress root that jutted from the murky depths, locking the iron around her wrist so tight she felt bones grinding. Then they waded back to shore, leaving her alone in the dark water while Thibodeau, Crawford, Big Jacob, and her children watched from the bank. "Mama!" Amina's scream cut through the night like a blade. "Don't watch, baby," Abigail called back, her voice surprisingly steady. "Close your eyes and remember. Remember you're loved. Remember you're strong. Remember." The water rippled. Something big moved beneath the surface, disturbed by her presence, attracted by her fear scent, and the blood from her cut wrists. Abigail's breath caught as she saw them. Eyes, red gold in the lantern light, ancient and hungry, belonging to a creature that had ruled these waters since before slavery, before colonization, before human cruelty learned to call itself civilization. An alligator. Massive, old as sin itself, risen from the muddy depths like a demon summoned by Thibodeau's hatred. "Please," Abigail whispered. But she wasn't begging the master. She was praying to Mama Yamaya, to the Orishas, to the spirits of all who died in these waters. "If this is my end, let it be quick. Let it mean something. Let my children survive to tell the story." The gator circled, slow and patient. Abigail could feel the displacement of water as it moved, could sense the terrible intelligence behind those ancient eyes. This wasn't just a beast. It was the bayou's judgment made flesh, come to collect a debt written in blood and chains. It struck faster than thought. Jaws like a bear trap closed around Abigail's midsection, teeth the size of fingers punching through cloth and flesh with surgical precision. The pain was, Lord have mercy. The pain was beyond description, fire and ice and tearing all at once. Abigail screamed. Couldn't help it, couldn't stop it. The sound that came from her throat was primal, the cry of every mother who'd ever lost everything, every woman whose body had been violated and broken, every soul who'd been chained and forgotten. The gator started the death roll, that terrible spin that tears prey apart. Abigail felt her abdomen split open, felt her intestines spill into the water hot and steaming, felt her life pouring out in gushes of blood that turned the bayou into a soup of agony. From the bank, Kofi and Amina screamed. Big Jacob made a sound like a wounded animal. Even Crawford looked away, his face green in the lantern light. But Thibodeau watched, forced himself to watch what his cruelty had wrought. And Abigail, in her final moments of consciousness, did something that would haunt Bellevue for generations. She spoke. With her guts spilling and her blood flowing, she spoke in the language of her ancestors, in the tongue of root doctors and conjure women, in words that carried the weight of the Middle Passage and the fury of 10,000 stolen souls. She cursed him, cursed his bloodline to the 9th generation, cursed his land to never know peace, cursed his name to be remembered only with horror and shame. And the gator, that ancient beast, stopped its death roll and looked at her with understanding in those prehistoric eyes, as if it recognized her not as prey, but as something greater, a sacrifice, a prophet, a witness to truth that couldn't be buried with her body. Then darkness came, soft and final, and Abigail felt her spirit rise from the torn meat of her flesh like smoke from a fire that would never truly die. Death, Abigail discovered, wasn't darkness. It was clarity sharp as broken glass. She hovered above the bayou, looking down at her own torn body still chained to the cypress root, intestines floating like water lilies in the bloody water. The alligator had retreated, satisfied or maybe disturbed by the curse she'd spoken. Her flesh was ruined, but her spirit, oh, her spirit was free in ways she'd never imagined possible. On the bank, Kofi held Amina as the child sobbed into his chest, both of them stained with trauma that would mark them forever. Big Jacob had collapsed to his knees, his scarred face wet with tears, his chains rattling as he shook. Crawford had turned away to vomit in the bushes, and Thibodeau stood frozen, his face the color of spoiled milk, staring at what remained of the woman he'd owned but never broken. Abigail felt no pain now, only purpose, only the terrible freedom of a soul unbound by flesh and fear. She could see everything, the past, the present, and shadows of futures not yet written. She saw Mama Yamaya waiting at the edge of perception, her spirit form smiling proud and fierce. Saw the ancestors gathering like storm clouds, ready to lend their power to what came next. "You still here, child?" Mama Yamaya's voice echoed across dimensions. "Got work left to do?" "I got children to protect," Abigail replied in a voice that was wind and water both. "Got promises to keep." "Then keep 'em," Mama Yamaya said. "But remember, the dead got different powers than the living. Use 'em wise." Abigail turned her attention to the scene below. She could feel the curse she'd spoken taking root in the land, sinking deep into Bellevue's soil like poison into a wound. But curses needed time to work, and her children needed help now. She focused her will, and the bayou responded. The water around her body began to churn, not from the gator but from something deeper, older. The cypress trees groaned, their branches reaching toward the sky like arms praying for deliverance. The Spanish moss started swaying, though no wind blew. Thibodeau felt it first. His eyes went wide as the air around him turned cold despite the summer heat. His breath came out in visible puffs, and the lantern in his hand flickered and died, plunging the bank into moonless darkness. "What?" he started, but his voice choked off as he saw her. Abigail's spirit made herself visible, drawing on power from the ancestors and the land itself. She appeared as she'd been in life, but also different, radiant with an otherworldly light, her torn abdomen visible and terrible, intestines hanging like the moss from the trees, a reminder of what he'd done, a promise of what was coming. "You can't be," Thibodeau stumbled backward. "You're dead, you're dead." "Dead don't mean gone," Abigail's spirit said, her voice echoing from everywhere and nowhere. "Dead just means free to haunt, free to watch, free to wait." She drifted toward him, and the master of Bellevue, the man who'd never shown fear of God or man, screamed like a child. He turned and ran, crashing through the underbrush toward the big house, leaving his prisoners and his overseer behind. Abigail turned her attention to her children. She couldn't touch them, the dead don't touch the living proper, but she could whisper, could plant thoughts like seeds in their minds, could guide without controlling. "Kofi," she breathed into her son's ear. The key to your chains, Crawford's left pocket. Kofi's head snapped up, his eyes searching the darkness. Mama, I'm here, baby. Always here. Now move. Get the key. Take your sister and run. The dogs is still drugged. The patrols is chasing ghosts in the wrong direction. This is your chance. Crawford was too busy emptying his stomach to notice Kofi moving slow and careful toward him. The boy's hands was still bound, but he was clever. Always had been. He used his mouth to pull the key from the overseer's pocket, then worked his wrists free with the kind of determination that made his mama's spirit swell with pride. He freed Amina next, then turned toward Big Jacob. The big man's eyes was closed, his lips moving in what might have been prayer or confession. Kofi hesitated. This was the man who'd betrayed them after all. But then Big Jacob opened his eyes and met the boy's gaze. Your mama was the bravest person I ever knew, Big Jacob said quietly, and the only one who ever made me want to be better than what I am. Free me or don't. I deserve whatever judgment comes. But if you free me, I swear on my sister's memory that I'll protect you and your sister till my last breath. Kofi looked toward where his mama's body floated in the bloody water. Abigail willed him to see her spirit, to understand that mercy wasn't weakness. It was power that fear could never match. The boy made his choice. He unlocked Big Jacob's chains. There's a man hiding in the swamp, Abigail whispered to all three of them now. Your brother Kwame. He alive but hurt bad. Big Jacob know where the patrollers dumped him. Left for dead in a ditch near the old logging road. And there's someone with him. Someone who can help. Big Jacob's eyes widened as knowledge flooded into him. Not words, but images, impressions, an understanding that could only come from the spirit world. He nodded slowly. I know where, he said, and I know who's with him. Come on, children. We got one more family member to collect before we run. Who's with Kwame? Kofi asked. Big Jacob's scarred face split into something that might have been wonder. A Haitian man, old conjure worker who escaped from a plantation in Santo Domingo during the revolution. They call him Papa Loco, and he's been hiding in these swamps for 20 years, helping runaways when he can. Your mama's spirit led him to Kwame. I'd bet my life on it. Abigail smiled, though none of the living could see it. She had led Papa Loco to her wounded son, sending visions and whispers until the old root doctor found Kwame bleeding in that ditch and carried him to safety. The three freed prisoners moved into the darkness, Crawford still heaving his guts out and unaware. Abigail followed as a watchful presence, guiding them around sinkholes and away from dangers only the dead could sense. They found Kwame 2 hours before dawn, fevered and delirious but alive, wrapped in blankets by a small fire in a hidden grove. Papa Loco sat beside him, an ancient man with white hair and eyes that saw into worlds the living couldn't access. The boy's mama sent me, Papa Loco said when they approached, as calm as if he'd been expecting them. Her spirit strong enough to shake the dead from their rest. She wants her children safe, wants them free. She wants revenge on the man who destroyed her. Can you help us? Kofi asked, dropping to his knees beside his wounded brother. Papa Loco's smile was equal parts kind and terrible. Child, I've been waiting 30 years for someone with enough fire to burn Bellevue to the ground. Your mama's spirit got that fire, and now so do you. So yeah, I can help. Gonna teach you everything I know about root work, conjure, and righteous vengeance. Gonna help you become the nightmare that Master fears in his deepest sleep. Abigail's spirit settled over the grove like a protective blanket, and for the first time since her death, she felt something close to peace. Her children was together. They had allies. They had power growing inside them like seeds in fertile soil. And Thibodeau? Thibodeau was starting to understand that some sins don't wash away with time or distance, that some debts get paid in blood and screaming, that the woman whose body he'd fed to gators was far from finished with him. The real haunting was just beginning. Papa Loco's hideaway was deep in the heart of the bayou, where even the boldest patrollers feared to tread. A cabin built on stilts above the swamp water, surrounded by cypress knees and Spanish moss, protected by conjure work so powerful that most folks who got close suddenly remembered urgent business elsewhere. Inside the walls was lined with dried herbs, animal bones, jars of mysterious powders, and bottles filled with liquids that glowed faintly in the dark. For 3 weeks, while Kwame healed from the dog bites and bullet graze that had nearly killed him, Papa Loco taught the children everything Abigail's spirit whispered he should teach. Kofi learned to read signs in nature, which birds meant danger coming, how to follow water when lost, which plants could heal, and which could kill. Kwame, despite his wounds, learned to move silent through the swamp, becoming one with shadows and stillness. Even little Amina had lessons, memory songs that carried secret messages, prayers that called on ancestors for protection. But the most important lessons was about root work and vengeance. "Your mama's spirit is powerful," Papa Loco explained one evening, his gnarled fingers mixing graveyard dirt with sulfur and rust shavings. "But spirits can't touch the physical world direct like. They need hands, living hands. Y'all understand what I'm saying?" Kofi nodded slowly. "You want us to be mama's hands, to finish what she started." "Not what I want," Papa Loco corrected. "What needs to be? That plantation is a wound on this earth, bleeding poison into everything it touches. Your mama's death, that was the final straw. Now the land itself is ready to reject Bellevue, ready to spit it out like a body rejects infection. But it needs help. Needs workers willing to do the hard, bloody work of justice." Big Jacob, who'd been silent since they arrived, finally spoke from his corner of the cabin. "I know what you're planning. Seen it done in Haiti before the revolution spread. Seen plantations burn, masters die screaming, the whole system collapse in fire and blood. You disapprove?" Papa Loco asked, his tone neutral. Big Jacob touched the scar on his face, that mark of old choices and older regrets. "No, I'm just wondering if you got room for one more set of hands, one more soul needin' redemption." Papa Loco studied the big man for a long moment, then nodded. "Your betrayals was many, Jacob, but your sorrow is real, and the dead, they sometimes forgive what the living can't. Abigail's spirit says you earned a chance. Don't waste it." The planning began in earnest. Papa Loco drew a map of Bellevue in the dirt floor, the big house, the quarters, the cotton gin, the barn where supplies was stored. He marked where guards walked, where dogs was kenneled, where Thibodeau slept. "Master's sick," Big Jacob reported. "That slow poison is working through him like rot through wood. He's having visions, sees Abigail everywhere, with her guts hanging out just like when she died. Can't sleep more than an hour without waking up screaming. Crawford says he's losing his mind." "Good," Kofi said, his young voice hard as iron. "Let him suffer, let him know what's coming." Papa Loco handed him a small cloth bag. "Gopher dust, made from graveyard dirt, sulfur and ash from a hangman's rope. Sprinkle this around his bed and his food on his doorstep. It'll amplify the haunt, make your mama's spirit stronger in his presence. He'll see her everywhere all the time, till his mind breaks complete." To Kwame, he gave a different mixture. "Dog poison. Mix it in meat. Leave it where the hounds can find it. Won't kill 'em. I ain't in the business of hurting innocent animals, but it'll make 'em sick enough they won't want to chase nobody for a good long while." And to Amina, surprisingly, he gave the most important task. "You small enough to slip places others can't. You gonna be our messenger, carrying word to the other slaves about when to run, where to gather, what to do when the fire starts." "Fire?" Amina whispered, her eyes wide. "Oh yes, child," Papa Loco said. "Bellevue gonna burn. Gonna burn so hot and bright they'll see the flames from New Orleans. Gonna burn till there ain't nothing left but ash and memory." Every night Abigail's spirit visited them in dreams. She showed Kofi where Thibodeau kept his money, gold coins hidden in the big house cellar, payment for the cotton harvest. Showed Kwame the patrol schedule, the weak points in Bellevue's defenses. Showed Amina which slaves could be trusted and which ones, like Ezekiel, would betray them for favor. And she showed them all her death, over and over, so they'd never forget why this had to happen, never forget the cost of slavery. never let mercy soften their resolve when the time came to balance the scales. "Mama comes to me every night," Amina told her brothers one morning, her small face serious beyond her years. "She says she ain't in pain no more. Says her body might be gone, but her love ain't. Says we're doing exactly what she hoped we'd do." Kofi pulled his sister close. "We gonna make her proud. Gonna make all the ancestors proud. Gonna show these white devils that enslaved people ain't property. We're human beings with power they can't never truly control." The night before the planned rebellion, Papa Loco performed a ritual. He drew symbols in the dirt around the cabin. Veve for the Loa, conjure marks for the Orishas, protective signs from a dozen African traditions mixed together into something new, something American, something born from suffering and resistance. "Tomorrow night," he said, "the moon's gonna be dark, the spirits will be strong, and Bellevue Plantation's reign of terror will end. Y'all ready?" They answered as one. Yes. But it was Big Jacob who spoke the truth they was all thinking. People gonna die tomorrow. White folks for sure, but probably some of our own too. Slaves who don't make it out in time, or who get caught in the crossfire. Y'all prepared for that weight on your souls? Kofi looked at his siblings, then at the shark tooth he now carried. The one Mama Yamaya had given his mother, passed down through death and determination. Slavery been killing our people every day for centuries. If some die tomorrow gaining freedom, that's a better death than living in chains. Mama understood that. Now so do we. That night, Abigail's spirit stood watch over her children and their allies, and she began to sing, softly in the old tongue, a lullaby her own mama had sung in a village that no longer existed. The living couldn't hear it, but they felt it in their bones, a comfort and a promise both. Tomorrow, Bellevue would burn, and from its ashes, something new would rise. The night came dark as a grave, moonless and heavy with the promise of rain that wouldn't fall in time to save Bellevue. Kofi, Kwame, and Amina moved through the shadows like their mama's spirit had taught them. Silent, purposeful, carrying the weight of generations on their young shoulders. They split up at the edge of the plantation. Amina slipped into the quarters, moving from cabin to cabin with whispered warnings. Tonight, when you see fire, run north. Papa Loco's waiting in the swamp with guides to the underground railroad. Take only what you can carry. Leave everything else. Most folks listened. Some was too scared, too beaten down by years of slavery to believe freedom was possible. Amina didn't judge them, just moved on to the next cabin, spreading hope like seeds in poisoned soil. Kwame headed for the dog kennels with his pockets full of poisoned meat. The hounds knew him from his time at Bellevue, didn't bark when he approached. He fed them gentle, whispering apologies as they ate. Within minutes, they was sick, vomiting, whining, too miserable to chase anyone. He hated doing it, even knowing it wouldn't kill them, but freedom required hard choices. Kofi made his way to the big house with Big Jacob beside him. The big man moved surprisingly quiet for his size, years of survival having taught him stealth. They found Thibodeau in his bedroom, just like Abigail's spirit said he would be. Drunk, fevered, mumbling to shadows only he could see. "She's here," the master whispered to the empty room. "Always here, watching, waiting, her guts spilling out like snakes." Kofi felt no pity. This was the man who'd violated his mama repeatedly, who'd fed her to alligators, who'd built his wealth on stolen labor and broken bodies. This was judgment come due. Big Jacob handed Kofi a torch, pitch-soaked wood that would burn hot and fast. "The drapes first," he whispered, "then the papers in his study. Let it spread natural-like." But before Kofi could light anything, Thibodeau's eyes focused on him with sudden clarity. Recognition flashed across the master's fevered face. "You, the boy, the bastard." "I'm Abigail's son," Kofi said clearly, "and I'm here to finish what she started." He touched the torch to the velvet drapes, and they went up like they'd been waiting their whole existence for this moment. Flames climbed toward the ceiling, hungry and beautiful, painting the room in shades of orange and gold. Thibodeau tried to stand, but his poisoned body betrayed him. He collapsed back onto the bed, coughing. "You'll hang for this. They'll hunt you down like the animal you are." "Maybe," Kofi said, backing toward the door as smoke began to fill the room. "But you won't be alive to see it. Mama made sure of that." They left Thibodeau screaming for help that wasn't coming. Crawford, the overseer, was already dead. Big Jacob had seen to that earlier, a quick knife to the ribs while the man was drunk. The other white employees had fled at the first sign of smoke, more concerned with saving their own skins than fighting a fire in the dark. The quarters was emptying fast. Families grabbed children, elders, whatever they could carry. Some hesitated, looking back at the only home they'd known, but Amina's voice urged them forward. "Run! North! Freedom's waitin'!" The cotton gin went up next. Kwame had soaked it in lamp oil before setting it ablaze. The flames caught quick, spreading to the nearby barn where winter supplies was stored. The whole plantation lit up like a vision of hell made real, smoke rising to block out the stars. And in the middle of it all, Abigail's spirit danced. The living couldn't see her, but they felt her presence. In the way the fire seemed to move with purpose, in the wind that drove smoke toward the big house but away from the fleeing slaves, in the sense that something larger than human anger was at work tonight. Big Jacob found Kofi at the edge of the quarters, watching Bellevue burn. "We need to go," he said. "Patrollers from neighboring plantations will see the smoke. Come investigate." "Wait," Kofi said. He was staring at the big house where something impossible was happening. The flames had surrounded the building, but Thibodeau had somehow made it to a window. He was trying to climb out, his clothes smoking, his face twisted in terror. And standing in the window beside him, visible now to anyone who looked, Abigail's spirit radiant and terrible, her torn abdomen glowing like a wound in reality itself. She placed her ghostly hand on Thibodeau's shoulder, and he froze. His screams cut off mid-breath. His eyes went wide with a horror beyond fire, beyond pain, beyond anything the living could fully understand. Then the floor beneath him collapsed, and he fell back into the inferno, Abigail's spirit following him down into the flames. The watching slaves, those who hadn't fled yet, gasped. Some crossed themselves, some whispered prayers. All of them understood. They'd witnessed justice delivered not by human hands alone, but by something older and more powerful. "She's at peace now," Amina said softly, tears streaming down her young face. "I can feel it. Mama's finally at peace." But Kofi shook his head. "Not peace, purpose fulfilled, there's a difference." Papa Loco appeared from the tree line, his white hair glowing in the firelight. "Time to go, children. The Underground Railroad's waitin', and we got a long journey ahead." They gathered the freed slaves, maybe 40 in all, out of the 70 who'd lived at Bellevue. Some had been too scared to run. Others had died in the chaos. But 40 souls was 40 souls saved, 40 families given a chance at something better. As they melted into the swamp, following Papa Loco's lead toward the first safe house on the road north, Kofi looked back one last time. Bellevue was an inferno now, flames reaching toward heaven like prayers or curses, smoke thick enough to choke on even from a distance. And standing in the midst of it all, barely visible through the heat shimmer, was a figure. Not Abigail's spirit, something else, something older. Kofi could have sworn it looked like an alligator standing on its hind legs, watching the plantation burn with ancient satisfaction in its eyes. Then Papa Loco grabbed his arm and pulled him forward, and the vision vanished into smoke and memory. Behind them, Bellevue burned till sunrise. The big house collapsed into itself, taking Thibodeau's body and all his sins with it. The cotton gin was reduced to ash. The fields would lie fallow, the land slowly reclaiming what slavery had stolen. Years later, folks would say the plantation was cursed, that you could still hear screams on moonless nights, that spirits walked the ruins, searching for justice that never came in their lifetimes but found them in death. They was right. Some wounds don't heal. Some debts get paid in blood and flame. Some stories don't end. They just change shape, becoming warnings, becoming legends, becoming the kind of truth that outlives the people who lived it. Bellevue was gone, but its memory and Abigail's vengeance would echo through generations, a reminder that enslaved people was never just property, never just victims. They was human beings who fought back, who resisted, who said no more, even when it cost them everything. And sometimes, just sometimes, they won. The journey north took 3 months. 3 months of hiding in root cellars and barns, of wading through cold rivers to throw off dogs, of trusting strangers who risked everything to guide them toward freedom. Papa Loco led the way with Big Jacob at his side, the two old warriors forging an unlikely partnership built on shared purpose and mutual respect. Not everyone made it. Old Sarah, who'd collapsed in the cotton fields years ago, died of fever in a barn outside Vicksburg. 2 children was lost when patrollers surprised them at a river crossing, swept away by current. Their small bodies never recovered. A young man named Thomas got caught stealing food and was hanged before his friends could rescue him. Each loss cut deep, but the survivors kept moving, driven by the knowledge that turning back meant death or worse. Return to slavery. Kofi carried his mama's shark tooth like a talisman. Kwame walked despite the limp from his dog bites. And Amina sang the old songs quiet-like to keep spirits up when hope ran thin. They was near the Kentucky border when Big Jacob collapsed. The big man who'd survived so much, who'd betrayed and been betrayed, who'd finally chosen redemption. His heart just gave out one cold November morning. He died with his head in Papa Loco's lap. His final words, a message for Kofi. Tell your mama's spirit. Tell her I'm sorry. Tell her I tried to make it right. Kofi held the dying man's hand and lied kindly. She knows. She forgives you. She says you earned your peace. Whether Abigail's spirit really forgave him or not, none of them could say for certain. But Big Jacob smiled like he believed it, and that seemed enough. They buried him in a grove of oak trees, marking his grave with stones arranged in the old African way. The night after Big Jacob's death, something strange happened. Kofi was keeping watch when he saw movement at the edge of their camp, a figure approaching through the darkness. His hand went to the knife Papa Loco had given him, but then the figure stepped into the firelight, and Kofi's breath caught. It was Kwame. No, it was someone who looked like Kwame but older, harder, scarred in ways their brother wasn't. The stranger's eyes held knowledge of terrible things, and when he spoke, his voice carried an accent that mixed Louisiana French with something Caribbean. "Y'all the Bellevue survivors?" the stranger asked. Papa Loco stood slowly, his old bones crackling. "Who's asking?" "Name's Jean-Baptiste, but folks who knew me before call me the Bayou Ghost." He smiled, and it was the smile of someone who'd seen death up close and chosen to laugh at it. "I heard about what happened at Bellevue. Heard Thibodeau burned alive in his own house. Heard his slaves rose up and ran for freedom." "You heard right," Kofi said carefully. "What's it to you?" Jean-Baptiste reached into his coat and pulled out a folded paper, yellow with age and stained with watermarks. "Because Thibodeau owed me a debt. Long story, but the short version is, my family used to own land neighboring Bellevue. Thibodeau's daddy stole it through murder and fraud during the Revolution. Been waiting 30 years for a chance to collect." He unfolded the paper, a deed legal and official proving ownership of the very land Bellevue had sat on. Found this in the ruins while the ashes was still hot. Was in Thibodeau's safe, the only thing that survived the fire. Guess whatever spirits was working that night wanted me to have it. Papa Loco's eyes narrowed. "You saying you own Bellevue now?" "Legally, yeah, but I don't want it. Don't want nothing to do with that cursed ground." Jean-Baptiste held out the deed to Kofi. "But I heard one of Thibodeau's bastard sons was among the runaways. Heard he was brave, smart, led the rebellion. That you?" Kofi nodded slowly. "Then this is yours. Your mama's blood watered that land. Your people's labor built everything on it. You got more right to it than any white man ever did." Jean-Baptiste pressed the deed into Kofi's hands. "Sell it, burn it again, turn it into a freedom school, I don't care. Just do something that honors what was lost there." Kofi stared at the paper in his hands, his mind racing. The land deed to Bellevue. Legal ownership of the place where his mama died, where so many had suffered. The irony was almost too much to bear. "There's more," Jean-Baptiste said. He pulled out a small leather pouch that clinked with the sound of coins. Found Thibodeau's gold stash too. Figure it rightfully belongs to the people he stole it from. That's y'all. Papa Loco took the pouch and opened it, his eyes going wide. This is enough to set up every one of these freed slaves with a new start. Buy land in the north, start businesses, get educated. Then do it, Jean-Baptiste said. Consider it Thibodeau's final payment for sins he never atoned for in life. That night they held a ceremony. Papa Loco drew symbols in the dirt and called on the spirits to witness what came next. One by one, the freed slaves from Bellevue came forward and received their share of Thibodeau's gold, payment for stolen labor, for stolen lives, for stolen futures. When it was Kofi's turn, Papa Loco added something extra to his portion. A small glass bottle sealed with wax. Inside, barely visible, was something dark and organic. "What is this?" Kofi asked. "Graveyard dirt from your mama's death site," Papa Loco said quietly. "Mixed with ash from Bellevue's burning. It's powerful, conjure child. Use it only when you need protection or justice. Your mama's spirit lives in this bottle, watchful and strong." Kofi tucked the bottle inside his shirt, feeling its weight against his heart. The next morning, Jean-Baptiste was gone, vanished into the wilderness like the ghost his name suggested. But he'd left them one final gift, directions to a Quaker settlement in Ohio where they'd be safe, where they could start building new lives far from the reach of slave catchers. They reached Ohio in early December, as the first snows began to fall. The Quakers welcomed them with open arms, providing shelter, food, and, most importantly, papers declaring them free. Legal documents that would protect them if bounty hunters came looking. Kofi, Kwame, and Amina settled into a small cabin on the edge of the settlement. They learned to read and write properly, studied mathematics and history, prepared themselves for lives that had been stolen from them at birth, but was finally, miraculously theirs. But they never forgot. Every night before sleep, they'd whisper the names of those who didn't make it. Mama Abigail, Grandmama Yemaya, Moses, Sarah, Big Jacob, Thomas, and all the unnamed souls who died in bondage dreaming of freedom they'd never taste. And sometimes, on moonless nights when the wind blew just right, Kofi would swear he heard his mama's voice singing in the old tongue, a lullaby from a village that no longer existed, carried across an ocean and through death itself to remind him, some loves don't end, some spirits don't rest, and some stories demand to be told till the last person remembers. Abigail's story. Bellevue's burning. The night slavery learned that enslaved people wasn't property. They was human beings with power enough to bring down empires built on their suffering. And that power, once awakened, could never truly be chained again. 20 years passed like water flowing toward the sea, sometimes rushing, sometimes slow, but always moving forward. Kofi grew into a man of learning, teaching freed slaves to read and write in a schoolhouse he built with Thibodeau's gold. Kwame became a conductor on the Underground Railroad himself, guiding souls to freedom the way others had guided him. And Amina, sweet Amina, who'd witnessed horrors no child should see, became a preacher, spreading a gospel that mixed Christianity with the old African ways, honoring ancestors alongside angels. But every year on the anniversary of their mama's death, the three siblings made a pilgrimage. South, back toward Louisiana, back to the bayou where it all began and ended. It was dangerous. Slave catchers still roamed, and technically they was stolen property despite their free papers. But some debts demanded payment, and some memories required tending. The year was 1865. The war had ended. Slavery was abolished, though freedom came with asterisks and conditions that made it feel more like a cruel joke than a promise. Still, it was something. It was a beginning. Kofi stood at the edge of the bayou where Bellevue once stood. Now nothing but scorched earth slowly being reclaimed by forest. Cypress trees grew through what used to be the Big House foundation. Spanish moss draped over rusted chains half buried in mud. Nature was erasing the evidence of human cruelty, but the spirits, oh, the spirits remembered everything. "Mama," Kofi whispered, kneeling at the water's edge where Abigail had died. He placed flowers on the surface, white magnolias, her favorites from before the crossing, before the chains, before everything changed. We made it. We're free now. All of us. Kwame stood beside him, his hand resting on his brother's shoulder. Tell her about the school, about the children learning to read their own names for the first time. Amina added her voice, soft and reverent. Tell her about the songs we sing, how we kept the old language alive, mixed it with the new. How her story gets told every Sunday in my church, a testimony of resistance and love. The water rippled though no wind blew. The air grew thick with presence, not frightening but heavy with meaning. Kofi felt it before he saw it, his mama's spirit manifesting one last time in the fading light of day. She appeared as she'd been before the violence, whole, beautiful, her eyes holding all the wisdom of Africa and all the sorrow of the Middle Passage. She didn't speak with words but with feeling, with knowing, with the kind of communication that exists beyond language. I'm proud, her spirit said without saying. You survived. You thrived. You remembered. We could never forget, Kofi said, tears streaming down his face. How could we forget the woman who gave everything so we could be standing here free? Abigail's spirit reached out, not touching but almost, a gesture of blessing that all three siblings felt in their bones. Then she began to fade, not disappearing but transforming, becoming part of the water, the trees, the very air itself. Before she vanished completely, she left them with a final vision. The baby she'd been carrying when she died, the one she'd planned to end with pennyroyal tea. A daughter, never born but existing in the spirit world, waiting for her time to return to the living through one of her siblings' children. A promise that Abigail's bloodline would continue, stronger for having been broken and remade. The sun set red as blood over the bayou, and the three siblings stood together in silence, understanding that some endings are really beginnings, and some spirits never truly leave. They just change shape, becoming memory, becoming legend, becoming the voices that whisper to future generations. Remember, resist, survive. As they turned to leave, Kofi noticed something half buried in the mud near where his mama died. He knelt and pulled it free, a gator tooth, massive and ancient, worn smooth by time and water. He knew without being told that this was from the beast that killed her, returned by the bayou itself as a final gift. He added it to the shark tooth he still carried, two talismans representing two kinds of survival, Mama Yamaya's gift of resistance, and the bayou's acknowledgement that even in death, Abigail had won, had become something larger than her suffering, had transformed pain into power that would echo through generations. We should go, Kwame said gently, before dark catches us here. But Kofi lingered one more moment, speaking to the water, to the spirits, to his mama's memory. You told me once that slavery tried to make us less than human, but you proved them wrong. Every day of your life and every moment since your death, you proved that we're more than they could ever understand, more powerful, more resilient, more human. He stood, the two teeth hanging around his neck catching the last rays of sunlight. This story doesn't end here. It continues through us, through our children, through every person who hears about Abigail of Bellevue and understands that enslaved people was never just victims. We was warriors. We was survivors. We was the ones who looked at the impossible and said, "Watch me." As they walked away from that haunted, sacred place, none of them looked back. They didn't need to. Their mama was with them, would always be with them, in their blood, in their memories, in the stories they'd tell until the last person forgot, which meant forever. Because some truths don't die with bodies. Some voices don't silence with time. Some stories, the ones written in blood, tears, and unbreakable spirit, those stories live eternal. And this story, children, this story of Abigail das Viseras derramadas pelo Hakare, it lives on in us, in every breath of freedom we take, every chain we refuse to wear, every time we say no more to systems that try to break us. The waters of that bayou carried away her blood but couldn't wash away her legacy. The gator's teeth tore her flesh but couldn't devour her spirit. And Bellevue burned to ash, but from those ashes rose something stronger. Proof that the enslaved could fight back, could win, could transform suffering into revolution. Who suffered? Suffered. Who resisted? Left memory, and memory we keep here in the echoes from the quarters. Listen close now and you'll hear them still, the voices of those who refused to be forgotten, who transformed bondage into battle cry, who proved that some spirits are too fierce to chain, too powerful to silence, too eternal to die. Their blood waters our roots. Their strength flows in our veins. Their stories live in our telling. Remember Abigail. Remember Bellevue. Remember that freedom ain't given. It's taken, fought for, paid in blood and tears and courage that don't know how to quit. And when you hear the bayou whispering on dark nights, know it's them, the ancestors, the spirits, the ones who came before, reminding us we survived then, we survive now, we'll survive whatever comes next. Because we their children, and they didn't die for us to forget. This is the truth, preserved eternal in the echoes from the quarters.